Here we got a good sized group. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? People are still joining, but we can start with the introductions. Just want to welcome everyone to today's webinar, What Makes ACT Psychiatry the Best Job on the Planet, presented by our wonderful ACT Psychiatrist experts, Dr. Steve Harker and Dr. Ann Hackman. My name is Lydia Chwastiak, and I'm the co-director of the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, which is bringing this session to you today. And this is actually the first webinar of a 4-webinar series that focuses on topics related to the role of ACT psychiatric care providers. So as people are joining, please just introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to hear what your role is, where you're working, where you are geographically. But I'll talk a little bit about, I'll give a brief overview of our MHTTC network. If I can have the next slide, Peyton. The MHTTC network is a nationwide network that's supported by SAMHSA. Our network includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office. It's located at Stanford University. There are also networks for addiction and prevention using the same kind of national structure. MHTTC network supports resource development and dissemination, training and technical assistance, and workforce development for the mental health field. So our Northwest MHTTC covers HHS Region 10. It's circled in the T-Mobile fuchsia up there. Magenta includes Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. So a little bit more about our Northwest MHTTC. Our goals are to accelerate the adoption and implementation of mental health-related evidence-based practices. Second, to heighten awareness, knowledge, and skills of the workforce. Third, to foster alliances and address training needs among diverse partners. And fourth, to ensure availability and delivery of free, publicly available training and technical assistance. So all of the training and TA and resources that we produce are all free. So as part of the network, the national network that I just showed a few minutes ago, each of the regional centers has an area of focus. And the area of focus for our Northwest MHTTC is evidence-based practices for serious mental illnesses such as psychosis. But we do provide training on a variety of topics, including integrated care, suicide prevention, DEI, school mental health, peer support, trauma-informed approaches, and others. And our target workforce includes, is the behavioral health workforce very broadly. So it includes behavioral health and primary care providers, school and social service staff, and others whose work has the potential to improve behavioral health outcomes. We provide newsletters, weekly newsletters, a resource library, other on-demand content on our website, but our mission really is training and technical assistance. So we have free self-paced online courses, live events like today's webinar that we will record and post, and virtual learning communities. So you can see in the lower right, next to Christina Clayton's photo, she's the co-director along with me. There's ways to get in touch with us, a QR code and social media. So please check out our website and sign up for our newsletter. Couple of housekeeping points, and again, for those of you who are just joining us, please chat in your role on an ACT team and your location, so we have a sense of where everyone is. But just for some housekeeping, we'll send a link to the webinar recording slides within 1 or 2 weeks. And what we want to do, everyone's very familiar with Zoom at this point, but there's both the chat and the Q&A. We'd like to use the chat today just for kind of troubleshooting technical issues or just sort of general comments that you wouldn't need to speak or have a specific response to. So Peyton will be monitoring the chat to kind of troubleshoot any technical issues. But the Q&A, if you have questions for our presenters, please type them in the Q&A box at any point in the presentation. Maria and Lorna will be monitoring the Q&A box to facilitate answering as many questions. We'll try to reserve about 25 or 30 minutes at the end to answer questions. This is set up as a meeting, so we can have open mic time. So if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A, you can type in questions and responses, but you'll also have the opportunity to raise your hand and unmute yourself and speak. Just want to recognize our funder. We're grateful to SAMHSA for the support and the funding for our center, and to acknowledge that the views and the information that's presented today is the views of the presenters and the panelists, and does not represent SAMHSA's official position or HHS official position. We have a very brief evaluation we'll ask you to complete at the end of the session. This is really important for us. It's required by SAMHSA, and it really provides us with the funding so we can continue to offer free training in TA. So a couple of ways to connect with the MHTTC: our website, our newsletter, signing up for our newsletter, and social media. So I think we want to start by introducing the panelists and today's presenters, and we'll just each introduce ourselves. As I said at the outset, I'm Lydia Chwastiak. I'm a psychiatrist and professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Washington here in Seattle. Full disclosure, I'm not an ACT psychiatrist, but my clinical work and research over the last 23 years has aimed to improve the medical and mental health care and outcomes for people with schizophrenia and other serious mental illnesses, particularly in low resource settings, mostly safety net and low barrier primary care and community mental health settings. So I'm really excited about this series, and I will turn it over to my colleague at UW, Maria Monroe DeVita, to introduce herself.
Great. Thanks, Lydia. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some names on here today, a lot of folks that we've connected with over the years. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I co-direct a center called the Spirit Lab at the University of Washington, which provides implementation support to our 22 PACT teams in Washington State. And then I also co-train, or I should say train and consult to ACT teams nationally, and then co-developed the Team ACT Fidelity measure. And that's a good segue over to Lorna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lorna Moser, and I'm also a clinical psychologist by training, and I'm the director of UNC's Institute for Best Practices. So as Maria described, I provide a lot of technical assistance, and I'm the director of a group of consultants and trainers, and work with states across the US, and also the co-developer of the Team ACT. So, Dr. Harker.
Hello. Yeah. Hi. I am a psychiatrist in St. Paul, Minnesota. I did my residency in Madison, Wisconsin, where I was first exposed to ACT, and then it started in Minnesota in 2005, and since then I've been involved with on several ACT teams with the psychiatric residency training program, placing residents on ACT teams in the St. Paul, Minneapolis metro area, and I've also been involved with helping get the Team ACT to Minnesota, and was trained Fidelity Reviewer. I've done a lot of Team ACT Fidelity reviews. I really like my job.
And I'm Ann Hackman. I'm a career-long ACT psychiatrist in urban Baltimore with the University of Maryland. I'm also division director for community psychiatry here. I will tell you a little bit more about my background when it's my turn to talk, but I came to this work as a resident psychiatrist and never left, and find it an amazing, fascinating, fulfilling job where you get to do a lot of hard stuff and also have a lot of fun. So welcome, everybody.
Yeah, we're excited to hear from you, Ann and Steve. So I'm going to just kind of kick us off here with some introductions of you all. We really appreciate those of you who were able to introduce yourselves in the chat, and feel free to continue doing so. I think it's a great opportunity for you all to get connected with other ACT psychiatric care providers across the US. And we also wanted to just launch a quick poll to just get a sense in aggregate how many folks are here representing different roles across ACT. So we've got psychiatrist, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, psychiatry resident, and then other. Okay, the numbers are coming in here. I'm going to end the poll here in just a second.
Nice.
Okay. So it looks like, can you all see that? So we've got, let's see, 39% nurse practitioners, another quarter or so psychiatrists, 3% physician assistants, and then it looks like we've got another almost third that are from other roles. So it'll be interesting to kind of go through the chat and hear more about the different roles. And I did want to just be clear here that a lot of this presentation series is really focused on psychiatric care providers. So it looks like we've got somebody accidentally drawing on here. Are you guys seeing that?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's just an accident here. Maybe we take off whatever drawing thing we've got here. So anyway, we just want to make sure that folks know that this is really geared toward psychiatric care providers in ACT teams, and that will be kind of our primary audience going forward. So next slide, please, Peyton. We also wanted to share that Lorna and I have been, some of you have actually been on these calls, but we wanted to briefly mention for those of you who have not seen that we have been co-facilitating these national ACT consultation calls through the Northwest MHTTC in collaboration with the University of North Carolina. And these calls started to address the needs of ACT teams facing the COVID pandemic, and we've continued them ever since. The next call that we have then is on June 3rd, and we wanted to just point your attention to the fact that that is a topic that we thought would be also of interest to you all. The focus is on introducing a new ACT nurse onboarding training curriculum that our colleagues out of the Oregon Center of Excellence for ACT, or OCACT, will be presenting at that time. So come check that out if you get a chance on June 3rd. And then next slide. Just wanted to also share with you all about, as Lydia said, this is a 4-part series. And so the first one will get launched kind of as a way to level set on just ACT psychiatry and why it's the best job on the planet, and also just kind of sort of reinforcement of the role itself. And then June 20th, we'll focus on pharmacologic considerations for ACT team prescribers, really zeroing in on clozapine and LAIs. On July 18th, then focusing on cardiovascular health, and on August 15th, updating substance use disorder care in the age of fentanyl and stimulants. So each of these you can register for separately. And so I will put that link in the chat so that if you haven't registered already, you'll have an opportunity to do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lorna to do some initial level setting into Steve and Ann's talk.
Yeah, so we've been wrapping up a national study of ACT, and there was just a couple of data points we thought we would share to let you know what we've seen across the US in terms of the composition of the psychiatric care team on an ACT team. So one of the questions we asked, so our sample was 205 teams that were operating across 10 states. And they had underwent a Team ACT evaluation, a fidelity review, and we had gathered data by way of what was documented in the materials for that review to then code it to get this data. So of the 205 teams, 65% of them only had a psychiatrist in the role of the psychiatric care provider, whereas 17% had the role shared by both a psychiatrist and a nurse practitioner. Then 15% had only a nurse practitioner in the role. And then also 3% had psychiatrists along with a physician assistant. And then we did not see representation of the other categories I had listed here. Only a couple states that we know of have explicitly allowed for physician assistants to assume part of that position within an ACT team. So it wasn't surprising to see that they weren't as present. And then another data point we thought we would share is the next slide. we asked, or we looked at, I should say, how many people share this position? Sometimes an ACT team only has one psychiatric care provider. Sometimes they have multiple ones. So we found that 72% of the teams had one psychiatric care provider in that role, whereas 25% had two psychiatric care providers sharing that role on a single team. And then 3% had three psychiatric care providers in that role. So just giving us kind of a landscape of what we were seeing by way of that part of the study.
All right. Hello. So yeah, I'm talking today about what about being an ACT psychiatrist is good for me, because for me, I feel really effective day to day in solving problems that are really difficult. And that kind of the caveat being that I'm on a good ACT team and I'm integrated into it. And so it gives me this hopeful feeling. One example to just this morning, we have a young man who's had 3 serious suicide attempts that should have all been lethal. Somehow they weren't due to command voices. He's in a locked psychiatric unit for a clausurial trial. Kind of in meth withdrawal, not feeling good, asked us to help facilitate with hospital rules, getting food to him from outside sources. So we had a couple meetings to do that, felt good about it, and found out this morning that his friends were putting meth in the sandwiches. He's been smoking meth on the inpatient unit each day while we've been trying to analyze this complicated clausurial trial. So that's just one example of why I think this job's fun, because my training teaches me that that's a strength. He did a great job of organizing all these conversations, being persistent. He ended up getting meth there and was somehow able to smoke it on the unit every day for a couple of weeks without getting caught. So it's just one example of what could be a hopeless problem. But I know with some of the things I'm going to go over on an ACT team, if you just apply some of this stuff as a team for years, you do get really good results. And you don't feel as hopeless when you're facing a set of circumstances like that. I know for me, when I was a medical student in 1995, my 3rd year, I was figuring out what I wanted to do in terms of applying to residency programs in psychiatry. And someone told me about this program in Madison where you talk to people that sleep under bridges. And for some reason, my brain said, oh, that's what I want to do. I still don't really know why, nor did I realize at a time how important that light bulb going on would be for the rest of my life. But I know that probably each of you, some of you are in here for similar moments that you've had where, oh, this sounds great and fun. It seems to fit me. I think others, there are systems out there that start ACT teams and need psychiatry. So they kind of take them from one system into another. Some people enter it not knowing much about it. And there's also a great deal of variation in ACT teams. When I started out in Madison in my program, I was on a team in my 2nd year that had been there a long time, was kind of going through the motions, not well integrated with psychiatry. And I kind of felt lost and floundering that year. But in my 4th year, I did an elective with Bill Knadler. He's a psychiatrist who wrote the PACT startup manual. So he was really well integrated into a really well-functioning team and was this role model that for me kind of shone a light on how fun and effective this can be. So I think part of my point is that I'm going to get into being a good ACT psychiatrist is somewhat dependent on what your local situations are. So I think this is a good way to bring some of those issues to light as well. So next slide. So in terms of defining the psychiatric role function on a team, which is what I'm hoping to do, both kind of traditional and non-traditional roles. These are some initial questions that I thought would be good to go through. First of all, just what in general is an ACT team designed to do? Since we're part of that, how are we contributing to those range of things? And how are we contributing to the overall team function. So next. So what does an ACT team do? On any given day, this is sometimes a very good question because it can go in all kinds of different directions, but there is this organizational framework underneath it. But first of all, I think that, you know, when ACT started in Madison, schizophrenia and the features of schizophrenia are what drove the structures and functions of ACT. That it was a model that looked at a problem in which they were discharging people from a state hospital with really good rehab plans in place, and they were bouncing back a week later because they couldn't translate that learning into a community setting and stay out of the hospital. So they decided to teach them more in their home settings and see them in their home settings, did a study, and they had a lot of success with that. And I think a couple of features of schizophrenia are important to note. One, cognitive deficits of schizophrenia, which gets into our role with our meds, because cognitive deficits of schizophrenia, unlike psychosis, don't respond that well to meds. Clozaril helps a little, but not that much. But they also account for the most dysfunction. There's studies showing that predicting tenure at a job is predicted by level of cognitive deficits more than level of psychosis. And so these original ACT teams were kind of designed to be continually addressing and trying to help people who have a tough time figuring out more basic things and remembering them. And so that also gets into, it's an exciting time in treating schizophrenia because we are starting to focus more on this in research. There's computerized cognitive enhancement therapy for cognitive deficits. We're finding out that aerobic exercise increases something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic growth factor, that actually is shown to reverse hippocampal volume losses that happens from schizophrenia. Aerobic exercise can do that. So there's all these non-medical interventions that are crucial to treating the actual illness we're trying to treat. So then it's kind of like surgeons. They decide to start cutting people open because they couldn't figure out how to treat these illnesses and they had nothing to lose. And I kind of think we're at that point in treatment of schizophrenia where the question is, can you treat this illness in an office, or with what we know about cognitive deficits, should all the treatment be in community settings, on your feet, moving around with them and teaching them in those settings? And then the second point here is that the illness has derailed them from the direction of their life, which gets into what outcomes we're looking for. I know the Beck Institute, when they started to develop CBT for psychosis, identified that when young people with schizophrenia get knocked out of their life and try to go back into it, they are derailed from their attempt to rejoin where their life had been by the illness. And then they develop automatic self-defeating schema that stay in their personality as they try to rebuild their life. And so that just speaks, that along with the fact that suicide rates in schizophrenia are much higher in the first decade of illness. You're actually at a higher risk for suicide if you're really high functioning and realize how much this illness has devastated you. So it gets into this whole idea that ACT as a treatment team, the outcome that we're looking at as a group is, how do we help someone get their life back, more so than how do we get their voices down? How do we have them be less paranoid, stuff like that. So it's this kind of broad-based, complex goal that we as physicians, even like surgeons as an analogy, are part of doing things that aren't typical for our training or our role. And it's a very complex team-based thing, obviously, but okay, next. So in looking at some structures that ACT uses to day-to-day help a team guide them in this complex process of helping someone get their life back, there's a few things which I'll get into more later, but just to start out with, some of the kind of structural features of ACT that everyone should know about. comprehensive assessment, individualized treatment planning, daily team meetings, are some of the features of ACT that help guide psychiatrists as well as the whole team in approaching these problems. Starting out with the idea of comprehensive assessment. What is that? I think it's two things. One, the PACT Startup Manual, when I was training with Bill Knadler in Madison, really heavily made the point of that ACT teams are in the business of continuous assessment, that it's a mindset of the team, which ties, I think, into our medical training. So any person who's been trained medically is trained to try to figure out what's going on, assess it, have a list of things, and based on your best guess, start a treatment. And then you analyze that. What's going on now? Is it doing it or not? Based on that, how do we modify it? What do we know now? And so it's this perpetual feedback loop that is this continuous assessment process. And that's one thing I keep in mind, because I do like having my identity as a physician intact. And I think I try to use that lens to help the ACT team, and really with this kind of mindset of comprehensive assessment. The other aspect of comprehensive assessment is that when someone starts on the team, each subspecialist does an assessment, voc, substance abuse, psychiatry, nursing, and then you share that information before you even try to start formulating a treatment plan. So it's a very data-heavy mindset, which then flows into how do you formulate a treatment plan based on the data? And then in the daily team meeting, how do you, as a group, work together to analyze what's happening, assess it briefly, change what you're doing, and so on. So next. So this is a slide. I think I drew this back in 2009 when Maria was coming to Minnesota for the first time to talk about the TEAM Act. But I often use this slide because in most of my talks, because this is the lens that I use when I think about my place in an ACT team, and how day to day, how to step back and kind of keep the flow of it in mind. And for me, it's a picture of a big feedback loop of people going out in the field and coming back in each day and sharing information. And so basically in this feedback loop, which is called the ACT treatment plan system, it's the concept of continuous assessment, and where you basically start with all these assessments, you talk to the client and their family, other natural supports, you try to figure out what some goals are that they have, how will we teach them skills to get those goals to happen, and then on the right-hand box, how do we then make a weekly schedule so that each week the vocational person is doing this, the CD person is doing this, when does a psychiatrist see them, so that there's this structure in place to do these things. And then the main point, though, is that knowing all this in the daily team meeting, that you're constantly modifying it so that as new information is coming in the team meeting, you're able to go, okay, how's it going with this goal? How should we change things? And kind of keep this process going, that when this guy in the hospital that I was just talking about, it's his goal to do music. He does a lot of rapping and recording, and he's pretty good at it, but you lose sight of that when he's sneaking meth into a hospital. And so this keeps that stuff in mind when this other stuff is happening to me. And that's the value of this treatment plan system, that you're still each day figuring out, well, how does this fit in with their goal? Because that's really where the rubber meets the road, where you're going to get engagement to get out of that situation. I think a couple implications of this overall system of information processing is that, so the ACT team, they're organized around this recovery focus. Like everything they do is organized around the client goals, including their schedule and what they talk about. And they're not focused on reactive crisis management. And I think I've been on two types of ACT teams, and the ones that stay focused on the recovery goals while managing crisis, like this morning, are much more calm, curious, easier places to work than a team whose mindset is more, this is the crisis, we're excited about it, we'll try to solve it, but that they lose sight of this stuff. And then the role of the doctor is a dual one. So as a leader, I'm sharing with the team leader supervisory role over clinical stuff. But as a clinician, I'm just a person working in a system that makes decisions kind of based on three things: what the client's thinking, all the data we can collect, and the values of the program, and trying to put those together on a daily basis. And then the third implication is that all these roles are blended. So whatever needs to happen that day does take priority over your own set role. So if you're out in the community as a physician and the client needs a ride to work, you might do that if you're going to be in the area. Or if there's a nurse that says they need meds, you might deliver meds. Or the nurse might do a behavioral intervention, or a voc person might ask them if they went to their primary care doctor. It's kind of this transdisciplinary role function that I think is implied in this stuff. So next slide. So, and getting very esoteric. So what I kind of see is this feedback loop. It magnifies client choice in a way that over time, you end up helping people make decisions that are in the context of their goals more frequently, if you're mindful of this. And they make choices, they make decisions, you make a big deal out of it, even if it's a bad choice, you talk to them at length about it. So then the next time they come around and they're making a decision, you're right there helping them make that decision. And so if you're kind of amplifying the frequency of those conversations over the years, you are starting to get traction on helping them become resilient, because they're learning to make good decisions for themselves, sometimes over years, and what it might take someone a month or two who's not struggling with schizophrenia. So that's how I kind of see this, that you're amplifying choices, you're kind of modulating the context of the choices, you're putting your thoughts into that, but then you're letting them make a choice after you've talked about it, and then you go from there. I mean, this guy, he made a choice to bring meth into the subway, in the Subway sandwiches. And that's a very interesting conversation to have about how important meth is to him, how terrified he is of life without being high, because he has horrible delusions that he's going to be put in a coffin alive for hundreds of years. And he's terrified of those. So the meth helps with that. So there's always these interesting conversations you can have if you're in this mindset as a psychiatrist or psychiatric care provider on the ACT team. Next. So I kind of want just to go over one specific person to kind of get across, for me, what's fun about this job, because you get to have this dual role that once you achieve kind of more stability, you figure out the meds, you then have a lot of funner work to do with recovery stuff. And that's where it gets, to me, really fun. But this is someone who, as a young man, grew up in a home that was very driven in prostitution, gang-related drug running, organized crime. He was the fall guy for a couple things, holding drugs, having a gun, and he got put in federal prison, got put in isolation for a year, and developed psychosis, along with a history of a lot of abuse growing up in that family system. So when I first started seeing him, he was on 40 of Zyprexa, the highest dose possible of this in Vegas, Sustenna, and a lot of Depakote. And his voices were so high, he could hardly walk outside. They were just bombarding him. So this was about 5 years ago, and I tried Clozaril and kept the Sustenna. He did a little better, but he complained about eye rolling, which was probably from the Sustenna. He blamed the Clozaril on it and stopped all meds. And he went in and out of some facilities, but became homeless, destroyed some facilities by clogging up toilets and water faucets due to psychosis. We couldn't find him housing, and suddenly we get a call months later after not finding him from Alaska, because due to delusions, he had gone to Alaska. So we called up there quite a bit, and he finally came back to Minnesota. And that's when I met his mom. And something clicked in that meeting, in that home environment, her home. She came across as a almost psychopathic, very, very sociopathic person who was at that time trying to wiggle around him being there and being ill to get money. And I just saw the dynamics, and something clarified for me. And when he ended up going to a place with housing, short term, that had staff, I began to realize how intermixed his PTSD, delusions, fears of his mom were, and was better able to target treatment medically for PTSD much stronger, which then allowed the clozaril to work better, because he was constantly flashbacking and having nightmares, and the hyperadrenaline stuff from PTSD did not let the psychosis settle down. So over the years, about a year it took me to get the right clozaril dose in terms of side effects adjusted. But he's now on a combination of meds that when he takes them, he has virtually no voices, no paranoia. He's bright, outgoing. You don't see many cognitive deficits in his conversations. Really doing well, and has a lot of energy towards life. So very satisfying outcome. But that's half the struggle, because with recovery, he's still dealing with a lot of self-defeating beliefs, traumatic background. He now has his own apartment and got a cat, which has been really nice for him. We're working with him on, I take him grocery shopping and kind of notice what he's choosing for food. He's gained quite a bit of weight. He's getting his GED at a local learning center. I also meet him there sometimes, and we're interacting with them. He's going to a health club to walk a lot, gets into foot problems with that. So I ended up helping him with shoes and fitting stuff and PT. And then we also try to get criminal expungement on him, because it's holding him back from getting work, his criminal record. But he's preparing to look for work. So next slide. So this is just one example of that feedback loop, and anybody's function on the team, but mine included. So I was over at his place once, and he had some Subway coupons, and he was nervous that they were not going to work for some reason, but he wanted to ride to the Subway. So we went there. He ordered 2 12-inch meatball sandwiches. And as I said, he's normally really gregarious. He's talkative, funny, outgoing, easy to connect to. But I think with his fear about the coupons, I'm still not sure what happened. When he walked in there, he was so different. He had difficulty speaking, really nervous, barking at the person. His body language was almost like posturing. And this is all about ordering a sandwich. So it was a very telling moment for me that he's used to us, so we see a certain view, but when you get him out in a novel environment, he changes. And to me, it's something I file away, because I know he wants to find work. And so I bring that back to the team, and we're obviously going to have to do some social skills training for novel situations with him, in terms of when he actually gets done with his GED and is in the process of looking for work. So for me in that situation, I'm just seeing that there's a lot still there, even though he's doing so well. And we're constantly assessing it. So, and that's where being on a really high functioning team, I see this as sort of one of the big leadership roles for psychiatry, to be out there doing this stuff, because you're teaching a group of people to analyze situations, and you're encouraging this climate where people are going, that's interesting. Just happened today with someone else, noticed that someone gets really nervous with their GED instructor online, and she's like, I'm wondering how he's going to do in a job interview. So that's the culture that I'm always trying to get to happen on my teams. That's the culture in Madison on the one good team that I had. And so that's kind of one of the main points today that I'm talking about, that there's this day-to-day flow, but you're also trying to shape that flow with this kind of stuff to create this open, curious communication on a team as a psychiatrist. And it kind of fits into our medical training too, because we're always trying to do things, then analyze it. So that to me is a big part of the role, along with all the fun medical stuff. So next. So to kind of summarize, like I've been saying, if you look at the word assertive, it's kind of a medical word in this feedback loop, because you're putting this treatment plan in action and you're analyzing it on a continual basis, and you're really pushing yourself to keep this culture going. And then that you're seeing a roadblock, like I'm talking about today, it's an opportunity to provide a client with just more choices. So that framework is what keeps me happy at my job, because it takes these impossible situations and it makes it into a puzzle with a group of people that are hopefully is equally interested in the puzzle. So next. So this all leads me then into, instead of starting out with this, I wanted to go over what the Fidelity tool TMAC describes as psychiatric role functions. And for all specialties on the team, there's this dual, what role do they have in treatment and what role do they have with the team, which again gets to this point too. And they're both being scored on a scale of 1 to 5. And so in treatment, you know, it does say you're providing at least monthly assessments, which for me, I'm on a forensic ACT team, so it's a very ill population compared to other teams I'm on. I'm seeing most people every 2 weeks, some every 4, some every 1. All in the community. I have an office that I'm rarely in. Providing brief therapy, this would include cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing strategies, supportive therapy. And you're kind of helping the team delineate therapeutic things. You're helping other people do therapy. You're doing it directly yourself, but not that frequently because you're not seeing them that frequently. So it's sort of a team-based process too there. And then providing diagnostic and medication education to clients. So that you're educating clients and the team, but so that they can make decisions in this shared decision thing. So there's a lot of education. For example, this person that I'm talking about in the Subway store, he complained of a migraine last week, and I asked him, have you missed any meds? He said, no. Well, this week we found out that he's doing so well that he decided to stop all of his meds and see what would happen 2 weeks ago. So I saw him a week into that, and he had a migraine, and his voices went up. Then he restarted the meds. Then he told us about this later. So that wasn't exactly shared decision-making on his part, but so now my job is to go back and kind of review that in a very soft way and try to bring up this concept. It goes both ways sometimes, but then you're also monitoring their non-psych medical conditions and non-psych medications. This is another big one. I mean, a lot of people on our team have diabetes, and there's so many psychiatric barriers, shame, other things, family systems to even feeling comfortable checking a blood sugar. So we're often using like self-management techniques for diabetes to help them work through cognitive bias against fears about checking blood sugars, because once you get them checking blood sugars, they really start to get into treatment more, but it's often these psychological barriers. But at the same time, you know, we're sending nurses to primary care appointments. I'm getting data on those. And we have it's primary care. We kind of have a primary care role for a lot of people in terms of surveillance, less with treatment, but we're definitely monitoring the parameters of so many different things on my team right now. And then if clients are hospitalized, communicating directly with the inpatient providers. I've been up to see this person that's sneaking meth in a couple times while he's been up there because he's starting Clozaril, and I really want to keep a close eye on how he's doing. They're all used to me up at the hospital now, so when I'm up there, it's very collegial. And I just find that that's so invaluable because when people are hospitalized, their symptoms are at a level that you don't normally see in the outpatient setting. They're also stressed, and if you're showing up while they're stressed, that's really a positive. So I try to get up there, and if I can't, I'm calling up there as well a lot. And then conducting home and community visits, like I've been saying all along, obviously, I have a bias towards the idea that schizophrenia is a treatment, an illness that needs treatment in all these settings for the stuff you're teaching them to really translate to real world applications. And I don't see a way to do this without doing that. You get so much more information, and you're able to be broadly integrated in with all these other functions that I've been talking about. Next. And then the role within the team. And what I'd hoped to do previously is go over why you do these things, because just listed, collaborating with the team leader and sharing clinical responsibility for treatment and team member, that's an obvious one. But and then also I do educational stuff of non-medical staff, like I'll just 5 to 10 minutes at a time on Clozaril, on Depakote. If I'm starting a new med they haven't heard of, so I do a lot of more brief trainings. It's never that formal, but they find it helpful to get trainings on that or health-related conditions if someone suddenly has an illness no one's heard of. And then, of course, attending the majority of treatment planning meetings is crucial, as I've talked about. Being able to provide your feedback on what happened psychiatrically in the last 6 months as you're preparing for a new treatment planning meeting is helpful. And then attending the daily team meetings, it's just so absolutely necessary to be there in proportion to the time that you're on the team. I'm with the team 4 days a week, and I'm there 4 times a week at the team meetings. And I think that's usually how it's expected, that if you're there for the daily team meeting. And then providing backup to the program after hours and weekends. That's not too mentally draining for me. I hardly get called for stuff, but it's also important with the idea that ACT teams are, one of our missions is that we're a 24-hour crisis service. So I need to be there for backup just for that reason alone. There is stuff that happens with meds and other things. So I occasionally get calls on weekends and in the evenings, and I'm always available for that. Next. Is that it? No. And then also you need time to do all this. So this is what I really like about ACT. If you've got 100 people on the team, the minimum requirement is that you're there 32 hours a week. You can go more than that. So that's most teams probably that are supposed to be at 90 are floating around 80. So having 32 hours a week for 80 people, that's a luxury to me, because if you're in a clinic, it's 500-600 maybe. And this is just, that's the rewarding part of the job, is that you're given time so you can do all these other things, time to collaborate with other systems, time to write letters, time to talk to staff as they need it in the field. That's all part of the deal. And then, of course, the on-call I've already gone over. So next. So like I've said, the long-term approach, if you just keep doing this over time, the great thing is people get better. And sometimes you don't know how they got better or why they got better, but 7-8 years later, this person on the unit could be a lot better. He might be making music, and I may not know how he's going to get there or what led him there, and looking back with some people that have done it well, but it just seems like this whole system of continually helping people make better choices over time, it has this profound effect. So, and that's why the discharge criteria for ACT is that you're kind of a functioning citizen in your local community, that you're stable in most areas of life without the level of ACT support you need, which is the goal we're all going for. Okay.
Steve?
Yep.
just a couple of really quick questions before we shift over to Anne, since we're kind of right on you and we don't want to lose the time in between. There was a question about the cognitive remediation programs or cognitive rehabilitation. Yeah, which ones do you use? Like Brain HQ or, some of the online ones?
I'm looking into using the Brain HQ. I haven't yet. I mean, with the team I'm on, it's just in the pandemic, there's been some stuff, but I just did this training in Minnesota on violence to others and suicide, and there was some studies using the Brain HQ that focus on cognitive deficits that actually showed a decrease in violence to others if you're targeting cognitive deficits. And then locally, the chair of the University of Minnesota, she does a lot of research on cognitive enhancement therapy. And I had a conversation with her 6 months ago about accessing the computer tools that she uses. So it's on my radar, but I also think that a lot of the side-by-side rehab that ACT teams do, the literature says that cognitive enhancement therapy with the computer stuff, if it's paired with psychosocial rehab, provides lasting benefit. And I think that's crucial. And for example, poor visual motor skills, poor visual attention leads to people with schizophrenia not taking care of their appearance, being unable to assess how well they've cleaned their kitchen. And so doing side-by-side cleaning is something on this first ACT team I was on that they did a lot of, where they're going through an apartment and helping someone organize their day. That has a profound impact on these things as well, because it's very similar to the computerized stuff. You're there asking them all these questions about this minutia of where should these clothes go, and they're making decisions, and it's pushing their brain to do things that it's not used to doing. So I always see that the more side-by-side, very basic blue-collar ACT rehab, it has a big effect on this, as well as aerobic exercise. So I think it's hitting it with all those things, but the Brain HQ is one that I want to look into. Most of the clients in our teams can't keep cell phones right now, so that's a difficulty with the forensic ACT team. But yeah, it's really interesting stuff, and I want to get more into it.
Cool. The other question was just about the how, you mentioned with the FACT team, you see people more frequently.
Yeah.
My assumption is it's because you've got a great team lead or program assistant on the team that help you to be seeing them more frequently. The question was, how do you see people as frequently as you do on the FACT team? But I want you to answer that rather than me assuming.
Yeah. So how do I schedule?
Or just like, how are you able to even do that? See people as frequently as you do, knowing how many people you have to see on top of, more than once a month is a lot.
Right. Yeah. So due to the circumstances of our team, I will schedule 8 to 9 people in an afternoon, but as I'm looking at it, and I average it out over time, I know I'm going to see 5 to 6 of them each time. So and it might be different one week from the other, but that's how it ends up. Occasionally they all show up and I have a late day, but so I do try to have every 2 to 3 months, I write out what I want my kind of repeating schedule to be, because people shift in terms of their needs. So I'm constantly changing that. If they're doing better, I'll go to every 4 to 6 weeks. But if they're doing worse, I'll go from 4 to every 2. And I'm giving that to the team lead and the team coordinator, and trying to get a new template in place to reflect those needs. So it's also something I'm constantly kind of I'm about to write a new schedule in the next week.
Cool. Okay, great. Well, why don't we shift over to Dr. Hackman? Thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks.
Dr. Harker.
Thank you. Yeah, Steve, you're a hard act to follow.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
And I certainly concur with Steve that this is a great job. A couple of sort of unique things about the program where I work. Steve, you mentioned that it's important to think about the local situation. And Maryland is a state where public sector psychiatry in general, and ACT in particular, have been adequately funded, not luxuriously, but if one meets fidelity standards, then one gets adequate funding for an ACT team. And that I realize is a bit of a luxury, that sometimes that can be a whole lot more challenging. Maryland is also one of 3 states at this point in the United States that does not have assisted outpatient treatment or outpatient commitment. So for all of the years that I've been doing this, we occasionally will have people who are court ordered to treatment via criminal justice or involved with a mental health court, but there are no outpatient commitment statutes here, and thus we're dependent on the charming personalities and persuasive abilities of those of us working on the Assertive Community Treatment Team. Slide, please. So I came to this a long time ago. When I was a first-year resident, there was a research project set up to look at assertive community treatment services with people who had major psychiatric diagnoses and were experiencing homelessness, who were unhoused. This was Lisa Dixon and Tony Lehman who did this research. And as a first-year resident, I was working on an inpatient unit, and they came and were recruiting patients to be on the ACT team. And randomized controlled study. And I was part of identifying potential participants early on. One of the things that I think was very unique at the time was that in that original grant, there were 2 peer specialists written into the program. And at that point, peer specialists weren't non-existent, but they certainly were not commonly part of psychiatric practice. And it's been very gratifying over the decades in between to sort of see that become a major and important part, not only of ACT teams, but of a bunch of other pieces of psychiatric care. Some of the original research on supported employment was done a decade or so later with this same assertive community treatment team. And that was wonderful and really interesting and could have gone better. But lo and behold, supported employment is now an important piece of every assertive community treatment team and absolutely vital to the recovery that Steve was talking about. So when I was a senior resident in 1993, I could do an elective on the assertive community treatment team. Well, this seemed to me like the coolest thing possible, and absolutely it was the coolest thing possible. The multidisciplinary team was spectacular. There were some very seasoned social workers. There were people who had just amazing skills in the community, who had spent time previously working with people who were unhoused and who were just great at figuring out how to trace people in the community and find them in places. I can remember going with one of our social workers to one of the neighborhood markets in Baltimore where there were a bunch of different stalls and stands, and he would go around to each stand and say, "So did you see Mr. Roger today? Oh yeah, I think he was down. I saw him down the way. He might have gone around to here." And this social worker managed to do an absolutely brilliant job of finding this man when it seemed to me as a still junior resident that he was looking for a needle in a haystack. So I never left. This seemed to me like an amazing thing to do. There were attending openings and I was like, this is great. I remember I was very pregnant by the end of my 4th year. And on my last day of work, which was less than 48 hours before my daughter was born, I visited a man who was living in an abandoned office trailer in a junkyard over in Southwest Baltimore. And you had to walk over boards and through mud and whatever else. And I could not have been happier. He was like, "Doc, you're going to have a baby soon." I was like, "Yes." Slide, please. So the research ended. Our state continued funding now through medical assistance and Medicare, and the state reimbursement for high fidelity assertive community treatment. Our first Fidelity Review happened in 2007 and was based on Maryland's interpretation of what was then the Dartmouth Assertive Community Treatment Fidelity Scale. And although I wasn't sure that we actually quite met it, we actually were pretty successful. And we've continued to maintain high fidelity status. The individuals that we serve right now are mostly housed. And as with, I'm sure, the other ACT teams that all of you are working on, they are housed in any of a variety of settings, from some supportive housing to assisted living facilities. We have several people housed in a single room occupancy. There are lots of board and care facilities. There may be subsidized apartments. They may be at home with families. Because we began working with people who were unhoused, all of them at the start, part of the objective was to get them housed. We continue to have some of the kind of drop-in capacity that we had back at the beginning. So we have a closet for donated clothing that is supposed to be helpful with anything from I have a job interview and I want to look really nice to there was an unexpected downpour and I'm totally drenched and I am very marginally housed at the moment and I want you to help me with that. We also have a shower and a washer dryer. There's much debate among the team about whether we do people's laundry for them. We've not completely resolved that yet. And earlier today, I had a client in complaining that when the nurse who's working with her did her laundry for her last week because she had places to go, he used too much soap. So there's that. We're still working on all of that. We also tend to have at least, a closet full of cans of soups around so that people can come in and get some of those needs met, because at any given time, we're working with a significant number of people who are unhoused or marginally housed. Slide, please. I should add that one of the other unique things about my job is that in addition to working on the ACT team and some of my division director responsibilities, I also spend a morning a week in our traditional outpatient clinic, which is housed in the same building as our ACT offices. So I often get to work with people who graduated from our assertive community treatment program to less intensive services. One of the other psychiatrists here is with a sister clinic that's part of the university system, and he will occasionally come in and report in one of our morning team meetings on one or two of our graduates, just so that the team can know kind of what's happened next. Because when, as Steve talked about, people reach that point where they're ready for graduation, they don't usually stay in a whole lot of touch with the ACT team, but Ms. J, who I'm going to talk about, actually came to our team and a client in 1993, just about the same I was coming as a resident. She had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, a history of being unhoused, multiple psychiatric hospitalizations, and several suicide attempts related to her psychosis. She had not been with the team for long when she let us know that she was pregnant. So we were actually both pregnant with second children at about the same time. We were able to help her with securing housing with her second child, as she did with her first. She gave the child up through a planned adoption and felt that this was the right decision for both herself and the child. For all of the time that I worked with her on the assertive community treatment team, she was not particularly forthcoming about symptoms. So there were times when it was very obvious that she was responding to internal stimuli. But when asked about this, she would say, "Oh no, I'm fine." But occasionally there would be some disorganization and there were some other things. She took medications consistently, did well with them, became very active in her church, was maintaining her apartment very nicely, very well organized. She got several volunteer positions, and actually a small paid job where she was unlocking and then locking up a local park at the beginning and end of the day. And after lots of discussion, she was ready to transition her services to our less intensive traditional community outpatient clinic. I have the privilege of still working with her today. And, that relationship over time is just a very cool and interesting thing. She has both of her children, when they came of age, got in touch with her. She has relationships with them. She had a very troubled relationship with her family of origin, but has actually been able to manage that really nicely. But early on in her time with me in the clinic, she came in and said, "I have to tell you something." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, Dr. Hackman, I hear voices and they tell me to kill myself." I said, "Gee, tell me more about that." And she did. And we were able to work through some medication adjustments. And when I said to her, it seems like this has been going on for a really long time, and what made it hard to talk to me about it, her response was, "I didn't want you to think I was crazy." And I did not educate her that crazy is a word that I don't like to use because I don't think it's helpful terminology. But that relationship that was built through the ACT team was something that was able to kind of be carried through to her work in the clinic and in subsequent treatment. Next slide, please. So there's some things that I think are relatively unique to the work done by ACT psychiatrists and ACT nurse practitioners. Part of it is around the population of people that we see. Steve has already talked a lot about the team and team responsibilities, and I'll touch on just a little bit of that. There are certainly psychiatrist skills and job expectations. And then I think there are some useful personal characteristics for ACT psychiatrists and NPs. Next slide, please. So obviously, the people that we see are individuals who have serious and persistent mental illnesses whose needs have not been met in the more traditional system. And obviously, if you're working on a forensic ACT team, they've also run into legal difficulties and other challenges. But from my perspective, these are folks where traditional services have kind of failed them. And we have the opportunity with an ACT team to take a more creative and intensive and team-based approach to help them have the lives they want to have. We are often seeing people with very complex medical comorbidities, and in individuals with schizophrenia, they tend to die 20 to 25 years younger than the general population. When I became a community psychiatrist in general, and particularly an ACT psychiatrist, it had not occurred to me that I was going to get pretty good at doing end of life work and come to really appreciate that work and what I, as a physician, and we as a team can bring to that, but being able to help people reflect on their lives and the positives in their lives, helping them reconnect if there are reconnections that they want to make. And sometimes that's with family or other important people. Sometimes it's with faith-based organizations that may have been important early on. But I've come to see it, particularly more than 30 years into this work, as a true gift to be able to walk with someone the whole way and see that as a real privilege of being an ACT psychiatrist. I can remember one of my clinic patients who I had initially seen on the ACT team, who was diagnosed with a metastatic melanoma that had become terminal, and her saying to me, "But what if I am so medically sick that I can't get my injection?" And I said, "I'm an ACT psychiatrist. I'll bring the injection out to your house and the clinic can deal with me." And when we are doing ACT work, then we really literally get to be able to be there. The people that we work with, as you all know, have a plethora of biopsychosocial needs. Steve has talked a bit about our role with dealing with, various kinds of medical problems. And in many situations, perhaps less so in Maryland, they may be mandated to treatment. So they may be less than excited initially about coming to work with us. Next slide, please. Steve has talked some about the team. I marvel always at the diversity of the multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary team, and particularly how well that can work together. And I've been through multiple evolutions of the same team over more than 3 decades. And it's a very interesting process. And that process of matching people with the individuals they are going to work with the best is just part of the fun and the alchemy of being a psychiatrist on an ACT team. Psychiatrist, and Steve mentioned this, provides some leadership, but is not the designated team leader, and that's a working hand in hand kind of situation. Less hierarchical than in some other settings. I tend to say to community psychiatrists in general, if you want to be the psychiatrist and be in charge, go somewhere else. I think that's particularly true in an assertive community treatment model. Obviously, we're meeting people in different settings than our office, and that is interesting and fascinating, and sometimes includes junkyards. Love working with families in natural support systems, although certainly that has its challenges. I work with several people whose families love to call on a regular basis and tell me everything I've done wrong with the medications. And, you know, that's a conversation that I'm going to have as long as we need to have it. And hopefully at some point things will improve with their family member. So we're held to fidelity standards, and we need to have a highly flexible approach. Next slide, please. I think there are things around psychiatrist and nurse practitioner on an ACT team skills and job expectations. You have to stay up to date on psychopharmacology. I don't necessarily do a ton of really complicated prescribing, but it's really important to be on top of things and stay current. You've got to be medically savvy, and Steve talked about some of this. I am again and again and again struck by how often there's a mental status change where everyone says, oh, she's not taking her medications. Well, no, in fact, this is new onset diabetes, and your brain does not function well if it's floating in Caro syrup. And let's figure out what's going on here, especially in my patients over 50. Sudden mental status change is medical until proven otherwise, and I am typically the person who has to remember that. We need to work well with the team and understand that other members of the team may be much more familiar with our clients than we are, or at least they're in those homes and in those settings on a daily basis. So if one of the therapists on the team calls me and says, I think we need to adjust the schedule and you need to get out and see Mr. Jones this afternoon, then I need to do that because they are seeing something and picking up on something that I need to be attentive to. Steve has talked about after hours availability. I think we have to be flexible. Occasionally in other community mental health clinics, I will see people say, oh, we can't do an IM because the nurse or the MA isn't there. I'm like, seriously? I don't think you can be a community psychiatrist and unwilling to administer long-acting injectable medications. And IM is likely to be the one doing that on our ACT team as one of our nurses. Lots of interaction and integration with other providers and agencies, and certainly in dealing with the medical establishment. I've been around for a very long time and happy to make some of those connections and interactions. And we need to be able to advocate for our clients and our teams. Next slide, please. I think there are personal characteristics that make one a good fit for ACT psychiatry, good communication skills, and sometimes outside the box. I had a wonderful experience this Saturday with a patient of mine who was born in Korea and lives with his family, has schizophrenia, has had pretty dreadful symptoms. There was a woman who rotated with me as a medical student and is now a psychiatric resident here. And she and I went out to his home and sat on the floor with his sister for a long discussion where the sister actually asked questions for apparently the first time about, did he get schizophrenia because he was depressed? And we didn't get treatment for that depression, and other things that had clearly bothered her. And my student resident, who is fluent in Korean, was so able to facilitate this conversation. I think it is essential that we believe firmly and absolutely in recovery and in the recovery model and in the whole concept that people can get better than they are doing now, and that we can be part of that and help with it. I think one needs to be at least a little bit adventurous. You know, we're going to go out into the community. Sometimes there are communities with challenges. We need to be smart about how we do that. We need to get to know the next door neighbors, because Miss Nancy is going to tell me if John has been having a tough time lately, and if he's in the house but just not answering the door, and I need to ask after her grandchildren and so on. Creative problem solving skills, and Steve has talked about some of that with seeing his patient who's managed to get the methamphetamine smuggled into the hospital. Okay, so how do we turn this into a strength that this individual managed something that I would certainly not have known how to do? And how can we use that in that person's recovery? And I think it really helps if you believe that this job is just about as much fun as you can possibly have. And that's not that it's always perfect every single day. There are lots of hard things that are bearable because you are in a team setting, you are working with a team, you are engaged with a team. And I was going to tell one more story, but I wonder if I should stop here. I see that we are at 4:16, and I could tell stories until at least 12:30 tonight.
We love your stories. I think probably good, if that's okay, Anne, for us
Sure.
to make sure we get some of these questions answered. We've been trying to quickly answer some of these, but yeah, Lorna, do you want to facilitate that part of it here?
So one question from earlier, it's tapping back to the person you were referring to, Steve, that was in the hospital with his meth added to a Subway sandwich. I think you mentioned that this person had PTSD, and somebody had asked, how is the PTSD being managed? You're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, not too great when he's in the outpatient setting because his psychosis and meth use is so high that we're not really getting to that in conversations. But medically, I do have him on Prazosin, as well as I've tried an antidepressant, SSRI, but he didn't react well to it. Depakote as well. And I think the next phase in treating him, he's such a risk to himself right now that we need to get his brain off meth for a while. And so everybody around we're all realizing that his last suicide attempt was when he slipped through the cracks and went from a facility to his apartment for less than a day. So he's high risk. So we want to keep him in a controlled environment for a while the clausula kicks in. And then we're going to be, I think at that point, when his psychosis is down, able to start talking about the trauma a little more and actually getting into therapeutic stuff. But we haven't been able to get there yet, treatment-wise, because you can't really effectively treat PTSD and go over trauma when someone's actively hallucinating.
You okay, I can tell you're unmuting.
My mouse could not find the right monitor in the right place. So here I am. So to both of you, a question had been brought up about just this idea of like, how do you keep up with seeing enough people when you're going in the community, because that travel time just eats up so much of your time. I heard the strategy that you said, Steve, around overscheduling, knowing that probably some folks you just won't have success with. So I think you mentioned like scheduling to see 8, but most days you may get away with seeing 5 or 6. And those are community visits from what I understand that you're scheduling for. But just kind of like this again, you both are operating in urban areas, which may not be the case for some folks. And so that's not that's you have your own struggles with travel at times in urban areas, but just maybe speak a little bit more about how you have managed to be able to spend more time in the community.
Yeah, well, I try to schedule geographic clusters. So if I'm seeing someone, they're all in the same part of town. I know there's rural areas in Minnesota where we've done TMACs that it's not possible to do what I do in Ramsey County, which is the smallest county in Minnesota. So, so in these other rural counties, I've heard of, situations where people will try to bring a computer via Zoom into a place that's 80 miles away and do a virtual home visit. And they try to have them drive and see people, but there's no way they're seeing the volume I am driving in those areas. So I think it's dependent on geography, but if you have the ability to schedule and control that variable, it's best to structure it so that you're seeing someone in one part of town and there's 6 or 7 people around there, and then the next day another part of town.
Steve, can you remind us to your FTE for your team? I know you're on a couple, right now, or is it just the FACT?
I'm on just the FACT team.
Okay, so for FACT, what percentage of your time, and then how many clients it is, that might help too, to just kind of provide more context. Because I know some of those roles you mentioned, the TMACT, we know nationally doing TMACT, the fidelity reviews, that like it can be untenable to do all of those things simply because you've only got 8 hours a week, or, that kind of thing. So for you.
Yeah, I have more time. I have about 32, and we're at 70 now. With the pandemic, we lost some people. So
32 hours a week for 70 clients.
Yeah. Other teams I've been on, they've been more at 90, and I'm still was at the 32. But if you're seeing people that are close together, and frequently, the visits don't often have to be that long because you're seeing them so frequently. So there's a trade-off there too. Yeah.
A follow-up question related to this, that I may get myself in trouble with what your response will be for both of you. If you had to come with trade-offs of, I can see people more frequently, but it'll be in the office because the rest of the team's going to help get them in, versus I'm going to give up the frequency I wish I could have because I'm going to give away some of my time to the travel to see people in the community. Which one do you think would be more important to try to hold on to?
Anne?
So I kind of do both. Our offices are here on campus at the University of Maryland Hospital. So if a therapist is bringing one of my clients in for a medical appointment and it's an easy thing for them to bring that person by the office, then great, I will do that. And be sure that I see them in the community the next time that I see them. So I also, like, no one should do this the way I do it. I do a lot of my documentation after hours. And although the team doesn't function except in the on-call function over the weekends, I will do weekend visits. If that's what I need to do to get caught up. I know that when I say this, my junior colleagues look daggers at me, and I understand that I trained and came of age at a different time. So I'm not encouraging people to do that, but I am certainly saying I really love this stuff, and I have a husband who also works too much. So I'm willing to put in some hours beyond what I'm being paid. I'm sorry, because I know many of you hate me now.
Yeah. And with my forensic team, it's different because they're just not going to show up to the office. It's a much different population. But I spent 15 years on a very high functioning traditional ACT team. A lot of them had been on the team for years. And my general rule was, if someone can make it to the office and prefers that, I'll see them in the office. And so each week I did have office visits. My main rule was that I didn't want ACT staff spending time bringing people to me and away from me. That efficiency to me is not worth it. And then if there are people that can't make it into the office, it means they've got a lot of functional deficits, and I should probably be seeing them in the community for those reasons, because they have a lot more problems. So that's kind of been the rules that I've applied, and that was kind of taught to me.
Hey, Lauren, I see that we have one more question and there is time for it, but I wanted to just ask Peyton to put the link to the evaluation in the chat as people are kind of reflecting on the session. If you could take a couple of minutes to to complete the evaluation for today's session, that would be great. But a great question to kind of end the session with.
Want me to ask it?
Yeah, why don't you just ask it, Lydia?
Drum roll.
Yes.
Well, the question is for a new prescriber. What is the best resource for a new prescriber to assist with medication management? And this is actually a nice question to segue into next month's psychiatric care provider webinar, because we will be focusing on clozapine and long-acting injectables, but other favorite resources that you guys use with your residents or junior providers, people who are just getting started?
Honestly, I, certainly have stalls on my shelf, their guide to psychopharmacology. I find that often my best resources are my colleagues, and I'm embedded in a division of community psychiatry. So there are always people that I can talk with. But I think, within ACT groups, the ACT listserv, those could be great resources. And I find that there are some challenges to this population that even some of my fellow community psychiatrists don't necessarily get. And, thinking about LAIs and some of the polypharmacy that we end up doing. Yeah, I really like colleagues as a resource on some of this.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. I have a great psych resident. She did her 3rd year and an elective 4th year and an ACT job open, but she's just like, I don't think I'm ready to be alone on an ACT team. Because this was in a county outside, it's right on the edge of the metro area. There's no other docs around, and it can be very isolating at that stage in your career. So it's not easy being an ACT prescriber just for that reason. So in our organization, we do have meetings for the psychiatric care providers. And like Ann was saying, I have an informal network of people that text me, and I text them when questions come up that are technical in nature about meds. That's my biggest resource. I've spent a lot of time reading about Clozaril in particular. But, in generally speaking, there is no good text or written manual in terms of, other than basic psychopharmacology for schizophrenia, the basics, but there's nothing specific written about ACT prescribing per se. How do you make a decision about meds in this setting? When do you switch to Clozaril? How do you titrate out? It's all just experiential. So it's really difficult it's a difficult job for early career psychiatrists if they're not in an office with other people and dealing with this level of psychopharmacology.
Yeah, thanks to you both for a great presentation, and also for that, for those resources and information. I think just as a general information, not specific to ACT teams, I put in the chat the link to SMI Advisor, which is a big SAMHSA-funded free training, and the resources are really, really wonderful. And there's an opportunity to seek an individual consultation. You can also join listservs related specifically to clozapine or to long-acting injectables. And as Maria indicated, Rob Cotes and Donna Rowland will be presenting a session in this series specific to those 2 types of medications, but a wealth of free resources.
Yeah, that does remind me too, Lydia, maybe for the next one, we can have a little more time to have for questions about exactly that, so that people can actually bring some of those specific questions to the group and kind of use it as a consultation time too.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah. That was our hope with this first one, but there's a lot to cover on this first one. But the goal would be somewhere around 20 to 30 minutes where we could just take your questions and sharing and actually hear from you, have you unmute, and if you have questions you want to raise or comments that you want to raise, that we can do more of that, facilitate a little more of a community here too. So we're just getting started, but appreciate you all being here with us.